So, hello Marina. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation to host you today. And
Thank
really my pleasure.
you.
So
Yeah.
you have it's our first time to meet virtually. We met through our common friend in Dahab, Igor, my
Mhm.
tutor or so. And I'm really excited about this meeting. And would you start maybe perhaps by introducing yourself?
Sure. My name's Marina Albi. I was born in Rome, in Italy. My mother's Sicilian, my father's American, Dutch and English descent. I grew up in America until I was around, well, first time I left the States, I was 15. I went to Paris on an exchange. And I remember thinking I wanted to get out of America and live somewhere else because I felt like I had been asleep and I finally woke up. And that feeling never left me, actually. So I went back to the States. I studied French and history, European history as an undergrad. And then I went to graduate school at Columbia University in New York, and I studied Soviet history there. I grew up on a farm in Vermont, and we had animals and a big garden. And I became a vegetarian when I was 13 because I couldn't eat my friends, and remained one until this present day, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I lived in New York City for 10 years, went to Columbia, and I met a guy there who had put an antenna on the roof to watch Soviet television. And he asked me to help him go to Moscow to get permission to use the Soviet TV in American universities to study the Soviet Union. He just, by accident, he found the Soviet satellite in the sky. And he was an inventor, so he figured out a way to transmit the signal into something that we could see. And so I started to work with him, and I was making a TV guide for universities who were studying the Soviet Union. Oma, come here. Sorry, the the other dog wants to participate. And it was 1985 when Gorbachev had just come into power, and he was using television to change the hearts and minds of the Soviet people. So we could see this huge transformation happening on TV screens, the Soviet TV screens, which we were watching. And I started to write programs of how to use Soviet television to study Russian and to study Soviet culture. And I decided to take a break from university, and I opened my own business as a consulting and a production company, and basically started commuting from New York to Moscow every 2 weeks for about 7 years. So I was involved in doing live television productions for audiences to talk to each other in the Soviet Union and in the States. And then lots of films and music projects and book projects until the early 90s, when I first met my husband, who was a DJ living in a squat in Leningrad. And I was a businesswoman with an office on Fifth Avenue. And it was an unlikely match, but we fell in love, and we're still together 30 years later. He's also does architectural projects and design projects, but he's still a DJ. He says, once a DJ, always a DJ. So, but I was living in New York and commuting. And then when around 1992, 93, actually, we had opened a telecommunications business because a lot of corporations needed a telecom, and they didn't have any telephone lines. This was before internet. So our first customers were Radisson Hotel, General Motors, Procter and Gamble, and Chevron. They all needed satellite links to their offices from their offices in the former Soviet Union, because some of them were Kazakhstan and it wasn't only Russia. Anyway, in 93, my two partners had a fight, and the investors put me in charge temporarily, and that lasted for 5 years. So I took my little baby, who was 5 months old, from New York, and we moved to Moscow. And I ran the company. It was about 250 men. mostly men, because it was telecommunications. But I ran the company for about 5 years from Moscow. And I finally decided that I was not a corporate person. I was an entrepreneur. So I decided to leave and I moved to St. Petersburg in 96. And then I've done a lot of different projects. I opened a vegetarian cafe. I also teach at the university. I teach academic English. So now it's academic English, how to write dissertations and essays and things like that for PhDs and master's students, Russian students, which I really enjoy. I think most of all is teaching, teaching high level academics, because it's just so interesting for me too, because I learned so much about different things through teaching them language. But anyway, yeah, so we started to travel to Egypt in around 2000 because there were really cheap charter flights, and it was, for $200 you could get 10 days, hotel, flights, food. And when our daughter was small, it was a great way to spend her holidays. So I used to go with my girlfriends and their children, and we would go to Sharm el Sheikh and, had a glorious time, especially when it's dark and gray here in St. Petersburg. It was always sunny in Egypt.
Yes.
And I fell in love with Egypt. I know people either love it or hate it usually. And I loved it. Same thing with Russia. And then I found Dahab in around 2004. And my husband and I decided to buy a piece of land there. So we have a project in Dahab, which it's been a long-term project, but we're hopeful that soon we'll finish, inshallah, and I can move permanently to Dahab, which is something that I really hope, I'm looking forward to. I mean, I never can say I can stay in one place because we like to travel. But if I had to choose one place, I think it would be Dahab. And I think everyone says, how is that possible? Why do you live in Russia? Why do you not live in America? And, for me, when I go back to the United States, I realize that it's just not my place. I just don't really feel comfortable there. I think that there's a different mentality, which doesn't suit me. And I try not to judge because I know everybody's different. But I find American culture to be very materialistic, very competitive. I find the people to be really sad underneath happy masks, happy smiley faces. Whereas the Russians are all very gloomy, but behind the gloomy faces, they're happy. So it's like, that's one of the reasons I moved to Russia, was because I felt first, Russians believe in magic. Russians believe in having a good time and singing and dancing any chance they get. And of course, they have a hard life, and they had a harder life before. Now it's again becoming hard, which made them really help each other. There was much more feeling of friendship and, helping each other out, which you don't have in the States. In the States, people compete with each other. And, it's like, if you're not rich and beautiful, then you're a loser, which is, that's the mentality. And, what's it? And when you leave the States for a while, you see it so much more clearly. I mean, Russia has its problems, of course, and Russian people have their problems. Egyptian people have their problems. Everywhere you go, there's certain problems. It's just a question of finding what suits you at different times of your life, I think. And for me, it's like, I love challenges, and Egypt is a huge challenge to do business there. But I think the reward is that people are really genuinely nice, friendly, they joke around so much. I mean, 75% of the time in Egypt, it's joking, it's like, that, right?
Yes.
It's a whole different way of living,
Even in
yeah.
hard, try to make it like they try to make humor out of it to get along.
Exactly.
Exactly. So
And I mean, the thing I don't like is when, like, people try to rip you off, like when I went to change money at the hotel and they gave me some ripped up old money, and I didn't even check it because I just trusted them. And then you see nobody will take your bills, and then I went back to them and like, what's up, guys? Why did you do this? And it's like that kind of thing drives you crazy, but that's everywhere you go. Everywhere you have tourists, you have the same thing. So and I really believe that human nature is the same. Everyone's the same. It's just a question of the context, and certain things bring out the good side of people and certain things bring out the bad side of people. And I like Egypt also because people really don't drink alcohol. Like, in Russia before, like I know they do, but it's not like in Russia and it's not like in America. I mean, like in America, even and in England, people drink, wine. They have an aperitif, then they have wine, then you're in Germany, right? And they have
Yes,
beer for breakfast. They have beer for breakfast in Germany.
true. Almost, yes. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a teetotaler. I occasionally do drink, but I just think the feeling in the air is different when you're in a place where people don't drink, and in Dahab, everyone is so easygoing, it's like I leave my doors open. I mean, people say I shouldn't do it, but I leave my bicycle just, anyone could steal it. It's not a great bike, but still, it's like you feel like children are running around by themselves without parents around, it's a feeling of a village, and it's sort of a happy village, because I mean, I've been going there for so long, and apart from the bombs and the plane that fell down, both events to me were very suspicious because they happened in specific moments. And of course I love conspiracy theories, but I think that this was a real conspiracy. But anyway, besides those things, I think Dahab and Sharm are like some of the safest places in the world. And right now, even more so, it seems even more so, And during coronavirus, like there was no COVID in Dahab. Yes, like there was no COVID.
Everyone,
people only wore masks in the bank and in the mobile phone office, Vodafone, right? That was the only two places people wore masks. Other than that, it was really refreshing, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but it just sort of rolled past Dahab.
true. But did you like that, or did you feel like
Yes.
unsafe? Okay.
No, I liked that. I mean, I had COVID twice and I had mild cases. It wasn't bad, but I also had 2 vaccines. I had 2 Russian vaccines. So, it's like, whatever. It was what it was. Hopefully it's done. But it was just strange. It was like, and maybe also just because people are outside in Dahab all the time. It's not like you're not in closed spaces. So maybe it didn't hit people as much. Yeah. So anyway, that's a little short story of my life. I love to travel. My family in America, I have 2 brothers and a sister. They're horrified that I don't live in the United States. They constantly try to get me to come back. But at this point, my tiny little American pension, which I'll start getting next year, will be enough for me to live very happily in the global South. And I would rather do that than go back to America and work in, Walmarts or wherever, So I'm pretty happy and I like my life. It's always something new, something different. I hope to learn Arabic, but I think I'm maybe too old because the other day I wanted to ask the security guard at the hotel, I wanted to ask him, how are you feeling? How is your health? And instead of that, I said, bon appetit. So in Arabic, I mean. It's like, whoa, I better not learn this language. It's like,
I think if you move to Dahab, you will learn it by time, just hearing it around the whole time. So yeah.
yeah, I know a little bit. I know Ana Mesh Masriya, because the people think I'm Egyptian a lot. So I say I'm not I'm not Egyptian.
Interesting.
I kind of look like Egyptian. I kind of look like you, actually.
Yeah, somehow. But you're more beautiful.
Oh no, that's not true. I know Bokra, Wabada Bokra. I know Rus, Mafish Felus.
Okay.
I'm Russian. I have no money. That's a good one when they say buy from me, and you say I have no Russian. I have no money. I'm Russian. It works. So yeah. So hopefully I'll learn Arabic. I would love to.
Whoa. Whoa. You've lived across many continents and you have been all over the world. And it's super interesting how you, what the reasons that you moved for. They're always interesting and different. And yeah, as a woman leaving your country in America, it's interesting because I don't know how is that for you or back then when you moved, how supporting were your family. And it's interesting that you say now that your brothers or like your siblings are trying to get you back to move to the States. But I mean, like, where do you feel like you belong most? Because that's an interesting question that I ask always in the interviews. And everyone has this feeling like they belong to several places sometimes, or they belong to one place, or they're comfortable in one setting. How is it for you?
That's funny because I think I'm not really into astrology, but when I've had my astrology done, my chart done a couple times, and they said, oh, you were born in a retrograde Mercury, which means I always go against the grain. Like I always do the opposite of what everyone else does. And I think that that's true. That's something that is definitely true in my life, that I like challenges. I like going places that people say that you're crazy to do that. It just makes me, energizes me somehow. I was brought up in a very feminist household. My father was a professor of psychology. He was the president of the American Psychological Association. He worked with Jimmy Carter. He was talked about not using the medical model for psychology. So instead of saying someone is ill and they should take pills, you say, no, society has to be changed because society makes people go crazy, which this was a very radical viewpoint, because it goes against the doctors and the big pharma and everything else. And it makes people think they have to change society. And the reasons people go crazy is racism, sexism, poverty. That's what makes people crazy. It's not genetics. I mean, genetics is maybe 10% of the time. And the psychotherapy is a waste because it doesn't solve the problem. It just helps rich people. And it helps the drug companies because now the drug companies make so much money selling antidepressants. And that's a thing also about the States. And I don't know about Europe now, but 1 in 4 people takes antidepressants, including children. Kids take Ritalin in school, which is a ADD, attention deficit disorder medicine, which it's like speed, and I know a lot of people whose kids take drugs and take antidepressants and take or get hooked on opiates. And my father was always fought against it. And, he was branded as a radical. My mother was a professor also of social work. So I grew up in this very radical household where we were taught that women can do anything they want. So I never felt like different because I was a woman. In fact, I felt always like I wanted more challenge. I wanted to prove that I could do things. So that's what I did, I think. And that's what I've always been interested in, trying new things. But now that I'm older, I really want to do one last thing, which is a couple last things, which one is, no, 3 last things. One, I opened a nonprofit here in Russia, teaching people how to be healthy in a toxic world. So it's basically, it's body, mind, and spirit. So it's information about how people can be healthy and happy. without spending money to do it. So it's nonprofit. That's one thing I'm working on now. The other thing is, I wrote a cookbook with our recipes, which is in Russian. So I'm translating it into English and to Arabic now. So I'm going to make the website at least trilingual to start with, Russian, English, Arabic, and then I'll try to branch into other languages. So that's one project. The second one is opening the hotel in Egypt, which will be like a spa, like a health resort with lots of sports, plant-based restaurant. And then the third thing is I want to write my memoir. So my daughter will remember everything because she says I told all my stories like 100 times, but just in case she'll forget, I want to write everything down for her. So yeah, so those are the three things that are in my mind that I'd like to finish in the next 10 years or so. But I keep telling myself the hotel is the last big project I do because it's going to be hard. I mean, it's been hard, but I'm not afraid. So hopefully we'll finish that soon, like in the next year and a half. And then
So
everyone who's watching can come and see this beautiful place. And you can come too.
I definitely will come. Like that's the thing that I have on my list. But what is the name? Do you already have a
Well, the
name?
working title is Maya Ekotel. Maya means water in Arabic. So Maya Ekotel, because we want to make it an ecological like showcase. So maybe put solar panels with the wind turbines and have people ride bikes to power the restaurant. And, we want to make it like ecological showcase as well as being a hotel and a spa and a plant-based restaurant. So yeah, it's the working title is Maya Ekotel, unless we change it. And the corporation that we are registering in Egypt is called Botanica for Tourism Development. So we use the name Botanica from our restaurant here in Russia because we have a 15-year already experience, and we registered our trademark here. So we'll see what happens. I mean, we do cooking classes also, and we can do them in Arabic. So to educate Egyptians and Arabic speakers about how to eat healthy food, because everyone wants to be healthy. And I think for me, diet is really important. And it's like it's a political thing, which in Russia, you can't talk about politics, but for me, food is political. And when I talk about food, it automatically falls into the political category when you think about why people eat what they eat. So the traditional Egyptian diet is not very bad. It's pretty healthy and it's pretty much plant-based. And even if you look in the Quran, which, gets you in trouble sometimes, but Muhammad said that you should not keep animals in cages, you should not brand them. And if you have a choice of something else to eat, you should eat something else. Meat is like the last resort if you have nothing else. And so I think that Egyptians also, the fact that they eat a lot of fast food and a lot of unhealthy processed food, it's a vestige of colonization. So the colonizers were English, but also American as far as Hollywood and American way of life goes, and American fast food, and all of this crap, I'm sorry, that people eat, which makes them really unhealthy. So, and drinks, sugary drinks and chips, and, you see this crap that kids eat, the little Bedouin kids. I mean, all kids do that all over the world, but I think people already want to know the alternative, and they don't know how to do it. They don't have the skill set to know if you make these little sweets for your kids, they'll love them. And then they won't go to the store and buy, stupid stuff that will make them sick. And so, I mean, that's part of what I'm doing is educating people about food. And also I want to educate people about wild food in different climatic zones. So in case of any problems with food supplies, people will know what to eat, what they can eat and what they can't eat in the wild where they live. In Russia, after World War II, there was a book that the government published to show people exactly what wild foods you can eat because there was a food shortage, so people wouldn't starve to death. And now we call it food security, but I think that this information has been lost. So I'd like to write a book, but also do like social media posts about if you live in this climatic zone, you can eat this, and just, make it for young people, make it snappy. So um, to give people information just in case, because, who knows what's going to happen in the future. It's like, we hope for the best, but you never know. So,
Yeah.
mhm.
Well, definitely you're a very strong and inspiring woman, and you, as you said, like always going against the flow. And yes, it is true. Like, and also like connecting the dots. It's hard for me to connect all the links that you've been through. Like you studied the Soviet history, and then you started your business, and then you moved to Russia to start a cafe and also a different business type, and then moved to Egypt to start a hotel. So it's really interesting for me to ask you, like, how do you get the information, or how do you step into the fear of moving into a project that you don't really have the information about? And also it's quite challenging to start a business in a different context. Like normally I started business in the US, and it was always like, yeah, you have to weigh the risks, you have to always make your market survey, like do all the
Mhm.
research before you move it. How is that for you?
That's
And
not true because every time I've done anything, everyone told me not to do it. They said, if you want to open a restaurant, you should open salami and beer, or what, meat dumplings and beer. That'll do very well. But no, but it's a question of intuition too, because I mean, I do yoga, and I believe that if you are physically in if your body is physically in harmony, it helps you improve your intuition. And your intuition, if you listen to your intuition, tells you what to do and what not to do. It's almost more what not to do than what to do. So I always tell my students, you don't have to decide what you want to be when you grow up. Just decide what you don't want to be. Just, decide what you don't want to do. I don't want to go to an office. Okay, that already limits, right? So I don't want to get up early in the morning. I don't, so I don't want to live in this country. I want you think about what things you're avoiding, and then you see what's left, right?
yeah, because
Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it's just a really strong feeling inside that I need to do this, and I'll find a way. But I've been lucky with partners because, I didn't have money. People didn't give me money when I'm not from a rich family. I always made my own money. And I've been so lucky because I've always had enough. Like I've never had a lot, but I've always had enough to do what I want to do and what I need to do. And I also give a lot of money back, like I share with other people. And I think it's a very subtle thing. When you're open to give, that's when you get. So if you're giving to people all along without any reason, you just do it. When someone asks you, or when you feel you need to help someone, you have to help them. And then someone will help you. It's like it's like a power balance, which I don't understand. I mean, there's a lot of things I don't understand. I don't understand how TV works or how telephones work. Even though I worked in telecom, some electrons flying through the air, to me, that's magic. So
yeah,
in the same way, I don't understand how energies work, but I know that in my experience, when I help people just for helping them, it comes back to me a lot stronger in good ways. But I also try not to get too attached to things. Like in Egypt, it's been really hard and long, but I always say, inshallah, right? I always say, whatever is meant to be will be. So I don't try to get too upset about things like that. If it's, I'm just trying to push it along the right direction, little by little. And usually, like, I have different projects I do at the same time. So I push them all along little by little, and then one of them will come to fruition. So it's a question of also being patient and nurturing projects, like maybe a little bit here, a little bit there for me. And then you kind of feel when something is ripe, right? You feel when it's going to happen. And sometimes it takes a long time. So I think that, being patient and just doing the best you can and not getting too emotionally involved with projects, because, anything could happen. You never know. But usually, if you have a positive goal, it usually works out. So that's been my experience.
Wow. But you're mostly learning by doing. You're so far, what I've understood from your words is that you just dive in, you get into the context, you start doing, you start moving the wheel, and you figure it out on the way. You just have a
No,
good.
actually, that's kind of true. But I'm not afraid to be stupid. So I ask people. I say, please tell me, help me. I go and talk to people who've done it. I go and I've met so many really nice people in Dahab, at the different hotels, different farms, different places, and everyone is nice and friendly and sharing their experience. So, I'm not afraid to be stupid. I'm not afraid to ask stupid questions, because I can't understand everything. I mean, when I was doing telecom, I had no idea how a satellite worked. I had no idea how an antenna worked, but I learned enough, by asking questions. Oh, a satellite is a mirror in the sky, you know? So, and you know enough to be able to then explain it to other people who don't know what it is, right? Yeah, so, and like when I had the telecom business, we were using Soviet Army satellites. They became then Russian Army satellites to service Chevron, which is an American corporation, So it was like putting together weird pieces. And sometimes you have to do that. So trying to look at things from, an outsider's perspective, sometimes that helps, because you don't know what it's impossible. It's like, why not? I can use Russian satellites. Why not?
Yeah, it's, you are also full of adventure. But I have an interesting question. Like, you have definitely very strong opinions and unique opinions when it comes to mental health, like the way tablets are used in Europe as well, like depression, especially in Germany, it's a very big topic. And you have also very strong opinions about food, health, and how to deal with that. You are a yoga teacher, and I would say you have very strong roots, which you explain that is coming from your family, and you're being raised up in a family that have their strong opinions and they're not going with the flow. But now you set off in the world, and from far so far I feel like, or I get the impression that you're different from your two siblings, and now you're different from every place you go. You have your unique stand, and you definitely maybe have encountered the social pressure because everyone around you is different. For example, I think before the interview you were saying that you started this vegetarian restaurant in Russia, and nobody believed it because it's a place where everyone is eating meat. And
Mhm.
yeah, you have this patience in Dahab, even though you're a foreigner, and it's banned to foreigners to own a land in Sinai in Egypt, and you had special ways to find your way.
Mhm.
So how has this social pressure affected you? Because I've been in the position where I come from Egypt. I have definitely good roots that's keeping me to my background. But I think everyone who have lived somewhere else from where they were originally uprooted, it is a challenge of social pressure sometimes. Do you question yourself
Sure.
or you get along with that?
Well, it's definitely a challenge. And when I was younger, I would compromise a lot more. Like I would go to parties where people were eating meat and smoking cigarettes and drinking and go out at night. And I was willing to socialize with a lot of people that I didn't feel that close to ideologically, but it was because I wanted to socialize, or I felt like I had to socialize with them. As I've gotten older, I realized that you don't have to do anything. You know, you should probably do what you want to do, not what you think you should do. And it's been a pleasure actually getting older because I don't waste my time doing things I don't want to do. So it's a really a relief. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think I used to drink, I used to smoke cigarettes a little bit, not a lot, but you know, that was definitely social pressure. And I wanted, you know, but I think teenagers, they all want to be like other teenagers, right? They don't want to stick out from the crowd. Um, so yeah, when I was younger, I think I was more prone to give in to pressure from outside world. But now, the last 15 years, pretty much, um, I just feel like I know who I am. I know what I want. I know what I don't want. And so I don't waste time. I'd rather be alone than be with stupid people, you know, um, and it's really a pleasure when you meet new people like you who are amazing.
Thank you.
And, you know, you realize that they are out there. It's, you know, it doesn't happen very often that you meet them. But I think Dahab has a large per capita of good people. You know, I've noticed that I've met so many nice people there from different countries. I think it's sort of a magnet for people who are willing to take a risk and not, you know, conform to everything that society says you should do. So, um, but I mean, the hardest thing for me was my family because I was the black sheep and I have two brothers and a sister, and they always made me feel like I was kind of crazy and wild, and they were always worried about me, that I took too many risks. So it was more from my family that I sort of felt excluded from their nice American way of life because, you know, they do everything right. Their kids go to nice schools that have lawns and they play sports, and you know, they do things that all Americans do. They have minivans and pay their insurance and have their medical exams, and you know, and I sort of have rebelled against that. And I mean, that's like one of the big things they talk about is medicine. You know, like they always scare me that I have to go get this checked and that checked and this checked and that checked, and I'm like, no, I don't like to go to a doctor. I prefer to keep myself happy and healthy, and we'll see who dies first. So
Okay. Interesting.
I mean, when you ask about it, I try to use humor as much as possible. And when I open my cafe here and they're like, people are like, oh, you're just like Hillary Clinton. You're trying to tell us what to put in our mouth. And I said, no, don't worry. I'm not going to touch your salami, guys. You know, and then they laugh. And so I try to use humor as much as possible because people react much better when you do that. And in my businesses, I've also tried to just make human contact with people who give me the papers that I need. Like, you know, in Russia, it's all women who give you the papers to open the restaurant, the health department, the fire department, the police, you know, you have to get these papers. And so I would just go myself to talk to them instead of sending someone who's Russian, right? I would just go and I would talk to them and meet them. And they would give me their mobile phones numbers, and, you know, we became friends. So, you know, a lot of times they would call me to find out what's happening in some part of the other department, like, so what are the firemen doing these days? And it's like, so yeah, but the human contact is really important, I think. And not being afraid, not being intimidated, because we all have the right to exist, right? And I mean, when I teach my women students, they always try to take up as small a space as possible, and they always say they're sorry, especially when they speak English and make mistakes. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Sorry. And I say, no, you can't. Don't say you're sorry, and take up more space. Don't be ashamed to take up space. You are just as important as anyone else. So, be bold. And it's good because I could see them, it's like, okay, yeah. So
Well,
yeah, that's about my view.
you are very bold. Then yeah, wow. But Marina, it is really interesting. I have so many questions for you. And thank you for sharing your part of being the black sheep. I am the black sheep in my family. I'm the only I am the only lady in my whole family who moved to a foreign country alone, and I made my way, started a master's degree. I finished it. I learned German and been working here for a couple of years, and also traveled to the US and been abroad so often. And yeah, I'm different. They also are always worried about me, like what was whatever happening in the world. And definitely they are living a peaceful life back in Egypt according to the traditions, which is beautiful, but it's just like a different thing. And thank you for sharing that you have a different view in life, and you enjoy it the way you want, and not as it should be for everyone else. So thank
Hmm.
you for sharing that. I think we are a lot of black sheep out there, and we just live life way, and it's totally okay. And it's really nice to see that it's continuing for you in a positive way, and that you're keeping the good spirit, and you're just not like I- definitely when we're younger we question ourselves a lot, because like when you're living in a community and everyone is different, and there is this social norm. And I would say I thought in a culture like the US, it's more of not a collective culture as much as it is in Egypt or Russia, I would say, where there is a very strong norm, like in the country. To some places like in Germany per se, it's more of like everyone has their own way of like coming up and being himself or herself, and it's more about the individual, I would say. Yeah, but
Hmm.
how has that been for you socializing? You mentioned that you've met a lot of people in Dahab, and you moved, and there was some social pressure for you at the beginning that you needed to socialize in the US, and you had to fit in a way or another, also engage in some activities that weren't maybe like going along with your ideas. How has that been in Russia, or in like in Egypt? Maybe you have elaborated a bit, but how was that then in the different countries where you've lived?
um well, I mean, I think in Russia for me it was interesting because as an American, especially a businesswoman, when you enter a room, you put out your hand, you said, hello, how are you? My name is Marina Albi. What do you do? And it's like, that's a very American way, asking what people do. And I had to learn to shut up, basically. So in Russia, especially in St. Petersburg,
Wow.
people are very withdrawn and quiet and sort of, how would you say, reserved. So when you go to a party, you don't shake anyone's hand. You just sort of walk around and you're introduced to people. Someone introduces you. So it's sort of like the old European way. Instead of going up and introducing yourself, you wait for someone to introduce you. And it was, for me, it was really hard to learn because, and also you don't smile too much because smiling in Russia is a sign of aggression if you show your teeth. So you're
Wow.
supposed
Okay.
to be very poker faced until you get to know people really well. Um, so I had to learn to sort of shut up and be more reserved and not be so overly friendly and gushy like Americans are. And when you go to America, they're like, "Oh, how are you? Have a nice day, la 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 la," right? That doesn't work in Russia. I mean, now they've started to say "have a nice day," which is not, doesn't really work in Russian. But so I had to learn to be much more reserved and quiet and held back, and listen more to people, because I also realized how uncultured I was coming from America. Whereas some people in St. Petersburg, they are very cultured, and they love to read literature. At least they did before. When I appeared here, everyone read all Russian literature, European literature, American literature. They knew all about music from different periods. It was like really, because they were so thirsty for culture, I think people spend a lot of time listening to music, not just having it in the background, but listening. And so I realized how little I knew. And so I started just to listen to people and listen to their conversations. And I learned so much, especially I learned Russian, but I also learned a lot about culture and history and music and poetry and art. And I have a lot of friends here who are artists. Some of them have passed on, but it was a whole new world for me. And it was almost like another planet for me. It was something, especially at the time, there was this in the 90s, this very free underground culture that existed in St. Petersburg, mostly, not in Moscow. And I was so lucky. I was right in the middle of it. And I was like one of the few people who was able to see what was going on from the inside. So I felt really lucky, and I think that's why I didn't leave, because I didn't know any other place in the world that felt like that. And some of it was really physically uncomfortable. Like you didn't have your creature comforts, and you didn't have any comforts. I would bring like huge bags of stuff for my friends here from New York, because there was nothing here, right? Everything was in short supply. But also, to me, that was also an experience of not having material things that I was just so used to, and then you start to appreciate them more, but you also realize how little you need to be happy. Like you don't need so much stuff. And, I would go to visit my family at Christmas, and there would be a zillion presents under the tree. Probably 90% of them would just, plastic crap that, people didn't need. So, and not to mention the poor Christmas tree, So, and when you grow up, you don't think about it, but then when you go away and you see people living in different ways, and you think, well, why did they do that? It gives you just a whole different perspective. And, like my sister's kids, they, were sneezing and they had runny nose. And I said, but they were running around with no hat and no socks in the winter. And I'm like, well, maybe you should put socks and a hat on the kid. And she's like, oh, that's Russian voodoo, you know. So instead of putting socks and the hat on the kid, she did an ear operation to drain the fluid from the kid's ear. It's like, for them, it's high-tech medicine, best in the world. For me, just put a hat and socks on the kid. It's like, but she thinks I'm crazy and I think she's crazy. But yeah, but Russia to me was a place where I learned a lot about culture, and how people could live with very little and create beautiful art and music. And Dahab is teaching me something more, even that you can live with even fewer things. Because, in Dahab, you don't need much. You don't need much. You don't need many clothes. You don't need many things. Just a yoga mat and a little bit of work to keep you, buying falafels and fruits, and mangoes.
Yeah, that's true. A simple life in a way or another in Dahab, I would say. And
Mhm.
it's interesting to comment on a couple stuff that you said. Like, it's interesting about your sister because I came from Egypt and I'm very used to the sun. And in Egypt, it's a very constant weather, I would say. Like, I was raised up and it isn't very often that it rains. It isn't very often, like, it rarely snows. And along the year, it's almost the same sun.
Yes.
Degrees
Mhm.
are just like not very variable. So yeah, and when I moved to Germany, I was like, the weather is changing every couple of hours. Suddenly it's raining, suddenly it's cold, suddenly it's sunny. And then I was like, oh my God, how should I dress up for all these? Like, and then I should have different clothes on and different preparedness to the whole time and
Yeah.
change. And then I was complaining to my German friend, and he was like, "Yeah, if something bad goes or something wrong goes, then it's your fault because the weather has never a problem. It's your problem."
Right.
And
Exactly.
I realize it's always my thing, and I don't complain sometimes anymore because yeah, it's not the bad weather; it's my bad clothing in a way or another. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
very yeah,
The Russians also have a saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothes.
exactly. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I like the way that you put the positive stuff about the places, all the places where you've lived, even though it's been challenging for you, and also your different perspective of viewing everything. Like back in that, people complain, or back in Egypt, people complain the whole time when their electricity is going off, or like there's a lack of supply, or if the water shortage come along at some days in Dahab, or these stuff or that. I'm pretty sure that you have loved challenges, and maybe you can say a couple of challenges that you overcome along the way, because you love them, you seek them, and you meet them, and you solve them. So how has it been in Egypt? You mentioned before the interview a couple of challenges you had in Egypt, and you definitely had some also. It was very interesting sharing this aggression about the smile. I hope I'm not very aggressive to you at the moment, but yeah,
No, no,
I'm
no, it was, I think, to make a long story short, when we bought the piece of land in 2004, we were told by the Egyptian consulate and the economic council that, oh, 10 years tax holiday and for foreign investors, please, please, please. So we bought the first piece of land, and then I couldn't register. I tried to register it for 6 years and I couldn't. And then it turned out that it was a fax that Mubarak had sent to the governor of Sinai saying no foreigners can own land. But I went through like 6 lawyers and nobody could tell me why they couldn't register the land. So then I put it in the name of my Egyptian partner, and we had an agreement with him, an insurance policy sort of, and then he sort of went crazy and he tried to take the project away from us, and we went to court and for 5 years and we won the case. So we got the land back, which was amazing, and everyone was also really surprised that we got it back. And at that time, my partner in the restaurant in Russia started to come to Dahab, and he was kiting and free diving. And so he's like, I'll be your partner. Let's buy the land next door and we'll continue the project. So he bought the land next door. We put the pieces together and we started to build again. And everything was doing fine until the Egyptian army stopped us last December. But hopefully we'll get our papers to continue this month, inshallah. And we'll finish the hotel. But it's been a really long, hard job. But again, I try to be positive and think that, everything's going to be fine. And in the meantime, get all the documents done. So we have all the proper documents. We have the good lawyers now. We have the investor. So everything's in place. We're just waiting for one little paper from the Egyptian army, and hopefully that will come soon.
so, uh, um thank you for sharing that, and also thank you for like keeping on your patience and believing in a positive way that there is always a way or another to move through it. And I think that's also coming from your experience, that you had several previous experiences before where you had the challenges, you got over them, and you said, okay, every time something happens, you find a way or another. So in a way, that has also happened to me. Or I'm not an entrepreneur like you yet, but yeah, I hope also that through these challenges one gets along. And yeah, with every coming challenges, I remind myself, okay, something has been hard and I got over it, so the next time as well will be the same.
Mm-hmm.
But one also other question, for the people who are like always traveling constantly, you've mentioned that every 3 weeks maybe you're in Dahab, and then you're flying to the US, and you have different parts of your heart maybe in different places across the world. How do you manage keeping the contact to the people in different parts of the world? Because like when I've been traveling so often, it's been hard for me to stay in contact with everyone, because like most of the people are staying in one place and they get to connect and see each other very regularly. You are a mom, you are a wife, and you are a businesswoman, and you are teaching, you're doing yoga. So how are you managing your time and keeping contact for your social network?
Well, I find that for me, it's, it's not a question of quantity, it's more quality now. So maybe, in St. Petersburg now, I have maybe 4 really good friends, 3 really good friends. And when I come here, I always make it a point to see them. And it's great. When I go to Dahab, it's the same. I have, 5 or 6 really good friends, and a lot of acquaintances. So, it sort of makes you choose with whom you want to spend time. So the same thing with the States. I usually go and see my family. I mean, those are the most important people. I have one really good friend left in New York, one really good friend in Boston. Um, but, over the years, people sort of, it's not that you lose friends, but they sort of fall to the side, and because you don't have enough time for everyone, so you do have to make choices of who you want to spend time with. And for me, I'd rather spend time at home with my husband and my daughter than go to a party, or, even go to the theater, or, so I really think it's important to do what you want to do and be with the people you want to be with, because they always float to the surface. Sometimes it's a new acquaintance, like I'll have a new friend who I really want to spend time with. So it's not like I just get stuck in some friendships, because I think sometimes old friends, like, for me, Facebook was sort of a disappointment, because when you connect with old friends and then you realize you don't really have anything to say to each other, and it should have been better left as a memory, but I mean, that's kind of a weird thing to say, but it's like, it made me realize that maybe it was in my mind, or at the time they were really good friends. But I think when you don't live close to each other, or your paths don't cross, or your interests become different, you drift apart. So I think it's really important to understand who you want to be with. And I mean, I'm lucky. I have maybe 5 or 6 really good friends in the world. And, we connect, not all the time, but we talk sometimes, and it's like we never parted, we feel like we just left off yesterday. So there are people like that. And I think that, time sort of disappears when you have relationships like that, because even like old boyfriends, I have a couple old boyfriends who I'm still really good friends with, and if I'm upset, I'll call them and they'll cheer me up. And, you don't have to be in the same place, I think. And it doesn't have to be a lot of people. I think, just even having a few good friends is really a gift,
That's very true. And I totally agree with you about the saying it's always about quality and not quantity. And yeah, it's hard to manage the time along all these different parts and roles that we have to play in life. But I have so many questions for you, and it's super interesting to talk with you, Marina. I cannot really stop myself from like, and I'm a curious person, so I always have Mm. But yeah, also it's for me very interesting how can you plan your life. You mentioned a couple of stuff that you want to do still, but how has it been for you? Because I think now it's a mindset that's across the world of people wanting to control everything. They want to put a plan for everything ahead of their life. And it's very challenging, this perfectionist way of living that they want to control, to save, have a saving, control their life, control their time. And it's very challenging to have this pressure on oneself the whole time. So how has it been for you? Did you just go with the flow? Because on one side you hear the whole, like you feel like you tell the that you are a person who's going against the flow. So you're married to a person from different culture and from different position, and you move to a different country, which not common for people from the US, I would say, to move to. You started your own vegetarian restaurant, and then you're doing this new thing in Dahab. Did it happen? Did you go with the flow, or did you knew as a teenager that you want this life and you planned it? How has it been?
No, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I decided to study history in college because history just sort of included everything because I couldn't choose. I had no idea. I wanted to save the world. That was what, I wanted to make people, I wanted to be a diplomat. And at first I thought I wanted to work at the United Nations, but they told me I needed another language, which is why I started studying Russian. So it's been step by step. It wasn't ever like a plan I had. But it's funny you say that because in my family, everyone always, every morning I say, "What's your plan today? Do you have a plan today?" to my husband, and they all laugh at me because Russians never make plans because they never think tomorrow could never come. So why make a plan, right? And in Egypt, it's Bokra or Bada Bokra, it's tomorrow or after tomorrow. So also they don't like to plan either, or they pretend they do, but they don't.
Yeah.
So as an American in Russia, I'm much more organized than the Russians are. But compared to my family in America, I'm completely disorganized. So it's really depends what you compare it to. Um, but no, I do go with the flow. I do go with the flow, but I always have plan B, which is what my husband laughs at me. He's like, "You always have plan B." I was like, "Yeah, I have plan B, C, D, E, F."
Okay.
Always in my mind, in the back of my mind, I think, well, if this doesn't work, I can do this. If this doesn't work, I can do this. So yeah, I plan, but it's more of a intuitive planning. I don't write things down and say, my sister's a planner. She plans like she'll have a dinner party and send invitations by mail and, have people RSVP, and she'll plan, like 2 months ahead of time who's going to come for dinner and what she's going to make. And, I'm definitely not like that. But, if I have a party, I'll start cooking a couple of days before and make sure I have all the things I need so I don't have to freak out on the day of the party, which is very unusual for a Russian person. Like Russians would just be more spontaneous. So, compared to who you compare me to, either I'm a planner or I'm a complete anarchist. It just depends. If you ask my sister, I'm an anarchist. But I've only missed one plane in my life, and I've knock wood. Um, I've always had what I needed. So, by the end of my life, I can say that I've been lucky and I've been somewhat clever about planning my life, because I've always felt I also always never wanted to depend on a man because my parents got divorced when they were already in their 60s. And so I always thought to myself growing up, I never want to be financially dependent on a man. So I've always lived my life in that sense to have financial independence, um, because I think it's really important for a relationship too. To have a relationship that works, it sort of has to be equal, not because we're the same, we're not the same, we're different, but you know, I don't want to be a drain on someone, and I don't want someone to be a drain on me. You know, it's like, I think it's important when you have a relationship to both parties to bring something to the table. I mean, it depends. Sometimes it works fine if a woman is a housewife and stays home and doesn't work. That's fine. Sometimes a man stays home. I mean, I know a lot of couples like that. And if it works, that's great. But for me, it was really important that I always felt like I could leave any moment if I wanted to. And for me, that was really important. So.
Oh,
So Yasmin, I just wanted to say thank you to you because I think you're an amazing person yourself, and I really would like to know you better, and maybe we can talk again sometime soon. But I just wanted to say thank you for doing what you're doing, because it's really important, I think, especially for women to share their stories, men too. I mean, I'm not sexist by any sense. I think it's really important for young people to share stories, to understand that anything is possible in this life. And it's just a question of being curious, asking questions, not being afraid to make mistakes, being kind to the people around you. And in that sense, usually things work out. So I would encourage other people to step outside the box, especially these days. Question everything you see and hear. Don't judge other people. Try to keep an open mind, and try to understand what it is that you want to do and what you can do, what contribution you can give to the world, because I think we all have something to contribute. And when we do find our potential and find what we can contribute, that makes for a very happy life and a very fulfilling life. So I encourage everyone to try different things, and find out what you're good at and what you like the best, and do it.
thank you so much, Martina, for your time. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing our experience. And thank you for giving the spirit of aging beautifully, and having positive attitude and enjoying life as it is, engaging wherever you are, and standing out for what you feel and want. And thank you
Mhm.
for your last words. I really, really gratefully appreciate this conversation, and looking forward to meeting you in person, maybe in Dahab or somewhere else in the world. And thank
Mhm.
you. It's been a very positive vibe that you are sharing. Hope to
Well,
meet you.
thank you. Thank you. Same here. I look forward to meeting you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Yasmin.
Thank you very much, Martina.